I have spent my entire conscious life building walls. This is not a metaphor, but a literal description of my trade. I was an architect of security, a man hired by those who had everything to lose. I designed panic rooms for politicians, installed biometric retina scanners for diamond dealers, and mounted safes that could withstand a direct artillery strike. My philosophy was simple and cold, like tempered steel. The world is a chaotic place, constantly trying to claw away what belongs to you, and the only way to preserve one's ownership is through control. I believed in the thickness of metal, in the complexity of encryption algorithms, and in the idea that security is a binary state. You are either protected or you are vulnerable. There is no middle ground. My own home was my masterpiece, my fortress. It wasn't just a house in a prestigious suburb. It was a system calibrated to my paranoid standards. Surveillance cameras covered every angle of the perimeter. Motion sensors were tuned so precisely they could distinguish between a stray cat and a human intruder. And the windows were coated in an invisible film capable of resisting a sledgehammer. But the heart of this fortress, its most secret organ, was the safe. I had installed it myself, trusting no contractors. It was embedded in the concrete slab beneath the floor of our master walk-in closet, hidden under a heavy Persian rug and a section of parquet flooring that only slid open with a magnetic key. Inside that safe lay our future. Exactly $100,000 in cash. These were not virtual figures on a bank screen that could be frozen or tracked. This was a physical mass of wealth. 10 neat stacks of $10,000, each bound in a purple bank strap. The bills were old, used, non-sequential. I had collected them for years, skimming from every large contract, turning my labor into paper that smelled of ink and human hands. This money was our ticket to freedom. Miranda and I had planned to buy a small vineyard in Tuscany when I turned 50. It was our shared dream, our contingency plan for when the world finally went mad. Miranda, she was the one variable in my equation that I failed to stress test. We had lived together for 12 years. I considered her part of the foundation, as immutable as the load-bearing walls of our home. She knew the combination: 35, 18, 92. I entrusted her with these numbers not just as a wife, but as a partner, an accomplice in my life. I thought we were guarding this treasure together, standing back to back against the world. I was so focused on external threats, on masked robbers and cyber criminals, that I didn't notice the threat waking up in my own bed, drinking coffee with me, and kissing my cheek before leaving for the gym. The catastrophe did not arrive with the sound of sirens or shattering glass. It arrived in the silence of a Tuesday, a gray and mundane day indistinguishable from 1,000 others. I returned home early to retrieve a file of blueprints had left on the nightstand. The house greeted me with its habitual silence, the cool air of the climate control, and the faint scent of lemon polish. Nothing heralded disaster. The alarm was armed. The locks were intact. The perimeter was unbreached. I went up to the second floor, entered the closet, and stopped. The rug. It was wrong. The displacement was microscopic, perhaps half a centimeter to the left. But to a man who has spent a lifetime measuring gaps in millimeters, it was like seeing a canyon open up in the middle of the room. My pulse, usually slow and measured, spiked instantly, hammering a dull rhythm of alarm against my temples. I dropped to my knees, my hands trembling as I threw back the heavy wool of the rug. The parquet panel was unlocked. I lifted it. The electronic lock of the safe was dark. The door was ajar. I pulled on the heavy steel handle, feeling the cold of the metal, which suddenly felt like the cold of a corpse. The light from the hallway fell into the chamber. It was empty. Not just empty, but scrubbed. There was nothing. No stacks of money. No land deeds. No gold coins I threw in for luck. Just gray, cold metal and a lonely dust bunny in the corner. $100,000. 10 years of my life. My security. My Tuscany. All of it gone. Dissolved into thin air, leaving not even a trace. I sat on the floor, staring into the black void of the safe, feeling reality around me begin to fracture. A burglar could not have done this. A burglar would have pried the door, left scuff marks, turned the room upside down. This was a surgical extraction. This was done by someone who had the key. Someone who knew the code. In the kitchen, I found her farewell letter. It lay on the granite countertop, weighed down by my favorite coffee mug. It wasn't even a letter. Really, it was a note, written in her neat, rounded script that I had once loved. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't make excuses. She simply stated the facts, like an accountant tallying the results of a failed quarter. She wrote that she was leaving. She wrote that she was tired of living in the gilded cage I had built for her. She wrote that my obsession with security and control had suffocated everything alive within her. She wrote that she had met someone else, Dominic, a man she had known for 6 months, a personal trainer at her elite gym, a visionary who promised her adventure instead of my calculated stability and the money she called the $100,000 compensation, payment for the lost years, seed capital for their new life somewhere on the islands where there are no alarms and no double-bolted doors. She took everything. She gutted our future to finance her affair. That moment was the point of no return. My life didn't just wobble. It slipped off its axis. The first few weeks, I lived in a state of manic psychosis. I didn't go to the police. Some part of me, proud and foolish, couldn't allow the world to know that Gabriel, the security expert, had been robbed by his own wife without a single shot being fired. I tried to track them myself. I used my contacts, my access to databases, trying to trace the movement of funds, but she was smarter than I gave her credit for. The money was cash. It was gone. It turned into plane tickets, hotels, and expensive watches on strangers' wrists. My work began to suffer immediately. I couldn't focus. I looked at blueprints for new facilities and saw only the empty safe. The line swam before my eyes. I started making mistakes. Fatal mistakes. During a security audit for a major jewelry house, I missed a critical vulnerability in the ventilation system. I simply didn't check it because my hands were shaking from insomnia and rage. 2 weeks later, that jewelry house was robbed through the very entry point I had left secure on paper. That was the end. In my industry, reputation is the only currency that matters. The rumors spread instantly. Gabriel has lost his grip. Gabriel is unreliable. Gabriel is drinking, and I was drinking. Alcohol became my anesthesia, the only way to mute the sound of the code 35189 to clicking in my head like a metronome. I drank cheap whiskey, sitting in the empty house that was once my fortress, without the $100,000 that served as my safety net, and without new contracts. I quickly found myself in a financial abyss. The mortgage on the house was massive. The bills piled up. I started selling furniture, technology, tools, anything to buy a little more time and a little more oblivion. But the math is unforgiving. 8 months after she left, the bank took the house. I remember that day in high definition, sharper than any surveillance footage. It was raining. I stood on the sidewalk with 2 suitcases containing the remnants of my life, watching a bank representative change the locks on the front door. The very locks I had chosen for weeks. The very door I had reinforced with steel pins. There was a bitter irony in the fact that the man who built vaults for billionaires now held no keys to his own home. I had become an outsider, a threat against whom my former home was now being secured. I moved into a basement apartment in a neighborhood where police sirens sing more often than birds. It smells of damp, mold, and someone else's fried onions. The walls are paper thin. The windows are barred with rusted iron grates that look laughable compared to what I used to install. But I don't care. There is nothing here to steal. My descent was total. I no longer wear suits. I no longer consult the elite. I work as a night watchman at a container storage yard in the industrial port zone. It is work for ghosts. I walk the perimeter under the cold glare of floodlights, checking padlocks, rattling chain link fences. It is primitive, crude security that requires no intellect, only presence. Sometimes, on long nights when the only sound is the rumble of distant trains, I take out my phone. I know I shouldn't, but it has become my new form of self-torture. I found her friend's profile on social media, and there I saw them. The photo was taken a month ago. Miranda and Dominic? They were on a boat, Some were tropical, the water a brilliant turquoise. She looked tanned, younger, laughing with her head thrown back. He looked rich, wearing a linen shirt and holding a glass of champagne. I stared at the photo, zoomed in on the details. I looked at the gold watch on his wrist. I looked at the diamond earrings she was wearing. That was my $100,000. I was looking at my sweat, my anxiety, my late nights, my missed holidays, all converted into their tan lines and their smiles. They were wearing my life like jewelry. I turned off the phone. The darkness of the shipping yard swallowed me. I am not rebuilding. I am surviving. The theft didn't just take my savings. It took my calibration. I look at people now and I don't see friends or lovers. I see potential breaches. I see walking vulnerabilities waiting to happen. I sit in my damp apartment, listening to the hum of a dying refrigerator, and I count the cracks in the ceiling instead of stacks of cash. I have learned the hardest lesson of all. The most expensive thing in the world, in gold or diamonds, it is trust. And once it is stolen, you can never earn enough to buy it back. I am Gabriel, the expert on security, living in the ruins of the only break-in I never saw coming.